Lucy Mack Smith's history continues with Chapter 25, assembled 15 years after the events occurred as found in her 1845 history.
Chapter 25, Martin Harris is permitted to take the manuscript home with him. He looses it. Season of mourning which ensued. Martin, having written some 116 pages for Joseph, asked permission of him to carry the manuscript home in order to let his wife read it, as he hoped it might have a salutary effect upon her feelings. Joseph was willing to gratify his friend as far as he could consistently, and he inquired of the Lord to know if he might do as Martin had requested, but was refused. With this, Mr. Harris was not altogether satisfied, and upon his urgent request Joseph inquired again, but received a second refusal. Still Martin persisted as before, and Joseph applied again. This time he received an answer not like the two former ones. In this, the Lord permitted Martin to take the manuscript home with him, on condition that he would exhibit it none save 5 individuals, whom he had mentioned, and who belonged to his own family. With this, Mr. Harris was delighted, and bound himself in a written covenant of the most solemn nature that he would strictly comply with the injunctions which he had received. This being done, he took the manuscript and went home. As Joseph did not suspect but that his friend would keep his faith, he gave himself no uneasiness in regard to the matter. Shortly after Martin left, Emma became the mother of a son, but it remained with her. But a short time, for it was soon snatched from its mother's arms by the hand of death. And the mother, for some time, seemed more like sinking with her infant into the mansion of the dead than remaining with her husband among the living. Her situation was such that for 2 weeks Joseph slept not an hour in undisturbed quiet. At the expiration of this time, she began to recover, and continued to amend until her health was restored. But as his anxiety about her began to subside, another cause of trouble forced itself upon his mind. Mr. Harris had been absent nearly 3 weeks, and Joseph had received no intelligence whatever from him, which was altogether a side of the arrangement when they separated. Yet Joseph kept his feelings from Emma, fearing that, if she became acquainted with them, it might agitate her too much. In a few days, however, she mentioned the subject herself, and requested Joseph to go and get her mother to stay with her, while he should repair to Palmyra for the purpose of learning the cause of Mr. Sass, Harris's absence as well as silence. At first Joseph objected to this measure, but seeing her so cheerful and so willing to have him leave home, he finally consented. Accordingly, he set out in the first stage that passed for Palmyra, and when he was left to himself, and began to contemplate the course which Martin had taken, and the risk which he had run in letting the manuscript go out of his hands, that it could not be obtained again, in case Martin had lost it through transgression, except by the power of God, which was something he could hardly hope for. That by persisting in his entreaties to the Lord, he had perhaps fallen into transgression, and thereby lost the manuscript. When, I say, he began to contemplate these things, they troubled his spirit, and his soul was moved with fearful apprehensions, and although he was now nearly worn out, sleep fled from his eyes. Neither had he any desire for food, for he felt that he had done wrong, and how great his condemnation was he did not know. Only one passenger was in the stage besides himself. This man, observing Joseph's gloomy appearance, inquired the cause of his affliction, and offered to assist him if his services would be acceptable. Joseph thanked him for his kindness, and mentioned that he had been watching some time with a sick wife and child, that the child had died, and his wife was still very low, but did not give any further explanation. Nothing more passed between them upon this subject until Joseph was about leaving the stage, when he remarked that he still had 20 miles farther to travel on foot that night, being then about 10 o'clock in the evening. To this the stranger objected, saying, "I have watched you ever since you first entered the stage, and I know that you have neither slept nor eat since that time, and you shall not go on foot 20 miles alone this night. If you must go, I will be your company. Now tell me, what can be the trouble that makes you thus desperate?" Joseph replied about as before, that he had left his wife in so low a state of health that he feared he should not find her alive when he returned. Besides, he had buried his first and only child but a few days previous. This was true, though there was another trouble laying at his heart, which he dare not mention. The stranger then observed, "I feel to sympathize with you, and I fear that your constitution, which is evidently not strong, will not support you, and you will be in danger of falling asleep in the forest, and of meeting with some awful disaster." Joseph again thanked the gentleman for his kindness, and leaving the stage they proceeded together. When they reached our house, it was nearly daylight. The stranger said he had been under the necessity of leading Joseph the last 4 miles by the arm, for nature was too much exhausted to support him any longer, and that he would fall asleep as he was walking along every few minutes towards the last of this distance. On entering our house, the stranger remarked that he had brought our son through the forest because he insisted on coming. He was sick and needed rest, as well as refreshment, and that he ought to have some pepper tea to warm his stomach. After this, the gentleman again observed that, when we had attended to Joseph, he would thank us for a little breakfast for himself, as he was in haste to be on his journey again. When Joseph had taken a little nourishment, according to the directions of the stranger, he requested us to send immediately for Mr. Harris. We accordingly did so without delay, and having given the stranger his breakfast, we commenced preparing breakfast for the family. And we supposed that Mr. Harris would be there to eat with us by the time it should be ready, for he always came in such haste when he was sent for. At 8, we set the victuals on the table, as we expected him every moment. We waited till 9 o'clock, and he came not till 10. And he was not there till 11. Still he did not make his appearance. But at 12:30, we saw him walking with a slow and measured tread towards the house, his eyes fixed thoughtfully upon the ground. On coming to the gate, instead of passing through, he stopped short and mounted the fence, and sat some time with his hat drawn over his eyes. At length he entered the house, soon after which we sat down to the table, Martin with the rest. Mr. Harris took up his knife and fork, as if he were going to use them, but immediately dropped them. Hiram, observing this, said, "Martin, why do you not eat? Are you sick?" Upon this, Harris, pressing his temples with his hands, cried out in a tone of deep anguish, "Oh, I have lost my soul! I have lost my soul!" Joseph, who had not expressed his fears till now, sprang from the table and exclaimed, "Martin, have you lost that manuscript? Have you broken your oath, and brought down condemnation upon my head as well as your own?" "Yes, it is gone," replied Martin, "and I know not where." "Oh my God!" said Joseph, clenching his hands. "All is lost. What shall I do? I have sinned. It is I who tempted the wrath of God, for I should have been satisfied with the first answer, which I received from the Lord, for he told me that it was not safe to let the writing go out of my possession." He wept and groaned and walked the floor continually. At length he told Martin to go back and search again. "No," said Martin, "it is all in vain. I have ripped open beds and pillows, and I know it is not there." "Then must I," said Joseph, "return with such a tale as this? I dare not do it. And how shall I appear before the Lord? Of what rebuke am I not worthy from the angel of the Most High? I besought him not to mourn so, that perhaps the Lord world forgive him after a short season of humiliation and repentance. But what could I say to comfort him when he saw all of the family in the same situation of mind of himself? Sobs and groans, and the most bitter lamentation filled the house. But Joseph was more distressed than the rest, for he better understood the consequences of disobedience. And he continued walking back and forth, meanwhile weeping and grieving, until about sunset, when, by much persuasion, he took a little nourishment. The next morning he set out for home. We parted with heavy hearts, for it now appeared that all which we had so fondly anticipated, and which had been the source of so much secret gratification, was in a moment fled, and fled forever.